Welcome back. Today we're going to do a little mini review of the final E500. I actually didn't buy this one with the intention to review it. I bought it simply for the tips. And for those of you who read HeadFi or other Facebook groups dedicated to audio, you'll see mention of Final E tips a lot. Lots of people consider these their favorite tips, and I've been reading about it for a long time. And if you actually look at how much these cost to have them sent to you, in the United States, typically they're about $19. So I saw this weird message on HeadFi that said, "Oh, go grab the final E500. It's $24.99 on Amazon, and you get a free set of Final E tips, which are about $19. So you're essentially paying about $5 for the E500 if you look at it that way. And that's the way I looked at it. But as it turns out, it's actually quite a nice little IEM, and I think there's lots of final audio fans out there, and I think the E500 is kind of right up there with some of the favorites, and especially in the low-cost budget area. So this is what they look like. They are sort of bullet style, little deep insertion style. For those of you who are a little scared off by deep insertion, these definitely do work better being inserted deeper in your ear, and there's instructions that finally gives you. And so it shows you that you should really push these quite deep into your ear so the cable is almost hitting your ear. So reason one, $24.99. Tips are about $19 alone. So if you're in the United States and have access to the E500, then that is reason one to buy it. So as I said, Final E500, it actually is a 6.4 millimeter. You can call it a micro dynamic driver. Comes with a full set of Final E tips, and there's probably one or two missing because I use these somewhere else, but you do get you get a bag of them, not the fancy case that you get when you pay $19 for them. So number two, it's kind of a rare tuning, and let's take a look at it here. So the Final E stock is this bluish line, and it sort of looks like a neutral-ish tuning, but there's actually kind of a slight bump to it. But, I'll call it neutral-ish. You don't find that kind of tuning at $25 all that often. So it is kind of a gentle rise there, and then again, another little gentle rise there. So for those of you who are looking for an inexpensive neutral-ish tuning, the stock tuning does that for you. Reason number three, if you are a wavelet fan or an AutoEQ fan, the AutoEQ preset for the E500 is also quite nice. And what AutoEQ typically does is change the tuning towards a more harmonious tuning. So if you look at the green tuning, you'll see that it actually elevated the bass quite a bit, brings down into kind of a more deeper V-shaped, harmonish midsection, and then rises a little bit steeper, which is also typical of Harman. So two tunings, $25, pair of tips. For the hobbyist, I think this is an exciting opportunity to, low cost, try a couple different tunings real cheaply, a beautiful set of tips, nice IEM. So first three bits. So that's 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3. So number 4, it's like Tanya. And I think people will compare it to Tanya because they're both bullet style, non-removable cables. But the E500 tends to be easier to drive. Tanya, I think, sounds better, but much harder to drive and takes a lot more volume. So E500 sounds better at lower volumes, a little bit less bass, I think, sub-bass and mid-bass, I think is what I'm saying there. And the other thing that E500 is sort of unique about is they really pitched this as a virtual reality ASMR gaming earbud. It has a tuning that's very, I don't know, I would call it a staging specialist is how I would describe it. That imaging and spatialization and layering, really nice for a set at $25. So that's something that you don't get on the Tanya as well. So kind of an interesting set, but unlike Tanya, this one needs a deep, almost a deepish insertion, so Tanya does not. So that's sort of the one con on the E500 versus Tanya. So what does it sound like? It's kind of a slightly boosted neutral, as I said, or if you use AutoEQ, a more engaging, balanced, Harman with AutoEQ. In either case, it's pretty much a playlist killing tuning. Nothing really sounds all that bad on it. It can handle just about any genre that I threw at it, and you'll just kind of keep clicking through to hear how wide it is and how tall it is on this E500. So cool little set. And for a set that I had no intention on reviewing, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. So as I said, the bass has kind of a slight boost, and that's really to complement the mids. Adds a little bit of fun and balance, just like Tanya. If you think the Blonde is a little bass heavy, Tanya was more in balance, and the E500 is kind of in that same range of the ratio of the amount of bass to the amount of treble is definitely more in balance. It's quite nice. So as I said, it's kind of Tanya will still hit harder and deeper at higher volumes, but at lower volumes, the E500 is a little better. The V-shape, if you're a V-shape fan and that neutralish tuning, you'll say it's a little bass light. It's not as impactful as you would be used to. But, I think they hit a nice balance between bass level and bass quality. It's kind of right there. And I think Tanya does the same kind of ratio. Really nice. The bass tends to hug the mids. It's quite controlled. It never really steps out of place. You never hear like the bass detached from the mids. Like that level note never goes above the mids or too far below the mids, and sometimes IAMs tend to feel detached in that way. Not so much on E500. But as I said, you have to insert this one quite a bit in your ear to hear the full bass. So if it's a little bit hanging out of your ear, or a little bit loose, your bass level is going to drop a little bit. So the mids without EQ, it's got this intimate imaging, but I think it's slightly muffled, slightly closed. There isn't as much detail in the vocals as there should be without EQ. But when you EQ it and bump up those upper mids, it's actually a tiny bit when you actually look at it. This little rise just rises a little bit more out here. Just a little more detail comes through across the mids that way. And I think I liked it. I prefer the AutoEQ more than non-Auto EQ. But sort of similar to Tanya, the mids get better with more volume. So between Auto EQ and raising the volume, you'll kind of get the same effect. But if you Auto EQ and raise the volume at the same time, it'll get a bit shouty. So in wavelet, you can dial back the amount of Auto EQ. So I think I was about 80% or so. So you might want to do that, especially if you're at upper volumes, because it will get a bit shouty there. And just generally, I think Tanya had fuller, richer mids, but I'm not really going to complain about the E500, especially at either one of them at that cost. So the treble level and extension and detail, they're all generally very good for that price. And the level is set a little bit lower. If you remember, this treble level at stock in blue is kind of a little bit below, not really below, but it's kind of a quiet level. And that goes back to the intention of the set for long session gaming, virtual reality. So I don't think they wanted to boost the treble a whole lot, just make it present so you could hear it, but not become fatiguing at all. And I think they achieved that. So if you do the EQ, Auto EQ, you'll boost that level, a little more detail, but it still doesn't really sound stretched thin. And I think it allows the upper range to shine if you just give it a little bit of boost. And as I said, it's really a staging specialist, gaming, VR, ASMR. It does all those things very well, maybe more so than pure music alone. So, but generally there's just space in all directions, and it's very rare at $25 to have as much height and width and depth and set at $25. So I think they did achieve what they intended to do, and as a side effect you get this something that does really well on music. You get an awesome set of tips, and you get to try out Auto EQ. So lots of good stuff there on a $25 set. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.